On another matter, do you think Beijing is seriously worried by AUKUS?
Oh, look, no, I don't think so. And, frankly, it's still too far away to know whether we'll get the submarines. I certainly hope we do. But, I mean, I think we have to be realistic. And, the 2030s is still a long way away. And there's a number of administrations in the US during that time, a number of governments in Australia and the UK that will pass. I mean, it only takes one of those governments or administrations to change their mind, and it won't happen. So, I mean, I think it's a good deal. I'm glad we did it. We have no choice, really, because we kind of jettisoned everything else. But I think Beijing, I mean, if you just look at the raw numbers of submarines, it's not really changing the equation very much. But I think it's important Australia does have its own fleet of submarines. It's just a shame that we have to wait, 7 years or 8 years before we get the first of the next generation.
Just on that, in relation to Beijing, why do you think Western governments are so naive in their relations with Beijing? You can go back to the Clinton administration letting Beijing into the World Trade Organization. Our free trade agreement, which was shredded when it suited Beijing, when they imposed all those outrageous restrictions on our trade. Why are Western politicians so naive as to actually believe these thugs, these communist thugs who run the regime in Beijing, and of course not at all interested in questions of honour and duty?
Well, I think it's because most Western governments in the US, in the 1990s and the early 2000s, believed the economic orthodoxy, and that basically said the more wealth countries had, the more likely they would be to become democracies. And I think there was a belief that by trading with China and by allowing it to grow, that it would move in the direction of a more US-like system. But certainly that hasn't happened. Indeed, it's probably moved in the other direction, you could say, since the 90s and 2000s. It's become more authoritarian and more totalitarian. So I think it's been a hard lesson for all of us that just because a nation is very wealthy does not mean it's going to become a liberal democracy. And I think, sadly, to be honest, if I can be very cynical again, I think, if anything, we're becoming slightly more like China. It's going the other way. And the reason for that is that, in order to fight, to compete with China, we have to have greater controls in the West over what people can say and think. And you saw that throughout COVID in the US, where there was a connection between the US government and the social tech companies to censor people who disagreed with the US government. I mean, that's quite shocking, but it happened on a large scale. And I mean, of course, that's only, that's a very small version, if you like, of what happens in China. But nevertheless, it's a move in the same direction. So that does worry me a bit, I must say.
Having experienced it myself, having something taken down from social media platforms, because I've dared to mention some of the medicines which are popular in some popular in some parts of the world at the beginning of COVID.
Of course.
It is extraordinary that we have that.